Yeah, wow.
So anyway, the Colorado Central again became part of the Colorado Southern. They negotiated with the Rio Grande to get all the way to the Texas border, and so that's how they got down here. And then the Colorado Southern got control of the stock in the down in Fort Worth and Denver City. So then along comes the UP. So the red line up here is the UP, and obviously, you know, this isn't great going over Sherman Hill. This is the Continental Divide, but is at about 8,000 some feet. But that's a lot better than 10 or 11,000 feet, and it's also drier, much drier. So they don't have as many problems with. They still have to raise the freight over the pass, but they don't get buried in snow quite as badly. So this is the UP main line to Ogden and then up to Portland. And then they had this line to Denver. Well, they said, gee, this will be great. We can get this line to down here at Pueblo, and then they're going to get control all the way. We'll have a line all the way to Dallas. That's great. And the Gulf. So they bought the Colorado and Southern. It became the Union Pacific, the Colorado division of the Union Pacific. And so this blue here is the narrow gauge that we've been talking about. So the Union Pacific owned all this. Well, if we remember the history of the Union Pacific, there was a guy named Durant and General Dodge, and they were doing all sorts of machinations and maneuvering with the money. And they had Credit Mobilier, and they were doing a lot of so a lot of the money disappeared. And but I will give the two of them credit. They were robber barons, but they did get the railroad built, which is probably better than most of the robber barons who sold stock and they either had 10 feet of track or maybe 2 miles, you know, and the railroad went bankrupt. So at least they did get the thing built. But it was Harriman who really rebuilt it into a good railroad. He was quite a guy. Yeah. But so anyway, they went into bankruptcy in 1893, and they lost the Colorado and Southern. And so here's the UP afterwards. They were able to keep their line into Denver, which operated the Julesburg cutoff, as they call it. And that was the city in Denver, and for freight train, they still use it for freight trains. It's a nice cutoff. They also have the line up here to Cheyenne, but it's if you're bringing stuff from Chicago, it's to Denver. It's better to come this way. And then we'll go back to the Colorado Midland, which was owned by the Santa Fe at this time. But you can see it's kind of pretty spindly. You know, it's not exactly heavy duty railroading. I'm not sure I want to go over that trestle. You know, what noise would you hate to hear? Bing! One of those wires lets go and the whole thing falls over. You know, yeah. So anyway, so what happens? The price of silver crashed. There were some manipulators who were trying to corner the market, and so the silver crashed in 1893 in the panic, and so the Santa Fe went into bankruptcy, and then the Colorado Midland went into bankruptcy. And so then a new company was formed, and so they sold the stock to a new company, and they got going again. Well, a few years later, the Colorado and Southern and the Rio Grande were able to get control of the Colorado Midland. The reason they did that is they didn't want the Santa Fe or the Union Pacific in there. They wanted it to be a local, in effect, a local railroad. They didn't want those two big railroads in there. And so in World War II, as you're probably familiar, the United States government formed the United States Railroad Administration, the USRA, because the railroads were just all jammed up in 1917 trying to get material to the East Coast to send to Europe, to the Allies. And so the government took over the railroads, and they built the famous USRA steam locomotives, which they got some of the best experts from all over the country, and they got together, and they have the USRA Heavy Mike and the Mikado and the Light Mikado and the Heavy Pacific and Light Pacific, and built some and designed some really good steam engines. And in fact, many of them ran right until the end of steam. And also the other railroads copied a lot of the features on those engines and put them in their own design. But anyway, so they looked at Colorado, and unfortunately, I have a feeling that there was probably a person in the bureaucracy in the USRA sitting in Washington going, wow, look at that Colorado Midland. That's standard gauge and it goes right across the Rockies. That looks great. In 2 dimensions, it looked very good. In 3 dimensions, no, it was not too good. Because again, they crossed 3 mountain passes. And when we're talking mountain passes in central Colorado, we're talking, 10, 11,000 feet, so it was lightly built. And so they got all this freight, and you can see here's another trestle. I don't think I'd want to ride over. It's a lot of wood, but boy, that's pretty lightly
Beautiful.
built. Yeah, it is. It's gorgeous. I wouldn't want to build one for a model railroad.
No.
But you think
Only
about
for
the
Walters.
heavy freight coming over in 1917, and yeah, the plant couldn't take all the traffic that was coming. They didn't have the terminals, so the yards were all jammed up. They didn't have the locomotives, didn't have the crew. So then, of course, what happens? The government says, "Oh, forget the Colorado Midland. We're going to reroute all the traffic over the Rio Grande down here to Pueblo and up Tennessee Pass, and of course over the Union Pacific. So we're going to route the Colorado traffic that way." And so then, of course, what happens? The Colorado Midland had very little traffic now, and so they shut it down in 2018, even before the war was over. So essentially, the USRA shut it down. They did keep that. The Midland Terminal had a line to Georgetown, and they ran that until 1949, and actually it's been resurrected. The Georgetown Loop is a railroad now.
Oh yeah,
they rebuilt that bridge. Apparently, it's quite a thing. So then in 1908, we're back to the Burlington finally. The Chicago Burlington and Quincy got control of the Colorado and Southern, and the C&S controlled the Fort Worth and Denver City. So that's how they had their line all the way to the Gulf Coast. And it became a strategic line from the Northwest to the Texas Gulf Coast for the Burlington. Here you see, this is a calendar picture from the 40s with FTs, 4 FTs, which was the standard General Motors product at that time, 4 1,350 horse, 16-cylinder locomotives. And this is really the locomotive that spelled the death knell for steam, because it was, they could put them on in Burlington, could put them on in Chicago, and they could run them to Denver and then turn around and run them back and run them up to Billings, and they just check the oil and fill the tank and away you go. Whereas the steam locomotives, even the later ones, had to go into the roundhouse and empty the ash and clean the flues and oil them, and you think about the steam engine parts. They're sitting out in a dirty environment with dust, and they're covered with oil, which of course picks up the dust, and then they wear. And so they had to wear, the parts wore a lot, and they were big and heavy. Whereas the diesel locomotive has all of its parts, they're smaller, and they're in a bath of oil, isolated from the outside environment. So of course they're much more reliable. And of course, as we talked about, the diesel locomotives were even these things were 25% efficient, thermally efficient, whereas the steam engine is 6-7%. So, and these things didn't need water. So anyway, so it was a kind of a good secondary line. There were several passenger trains that ran up here, and quite a number of freights, but it wasn't the main line. The line to Denver had many more trains. So it was a decent line. Back to the Colorado and Southern, that what was a good secondary main for the CB&Q became huge later with the BNSF and the BN. It's because of here's a typical coal train from the 70s and the 80s coming across Wyoming, 120 cars and very efficient, and the coal is so inexpensive that they could haul it long distances. And of course, coal is down from the peak, and I think it was 2007 or 6 or 7 was the peak, because of climate change and because of the concern about carbon. But it's still going to be a viable load for the fuel for the railroads in the future. And the big problem is the gas with the fracking that they're doing. The gas is low price, and the coal plants, like we talked about, are I mean, a steam locomotive is 6% efficient. A coal plant, a modern coal plant, is about 35% efficient. But when you're burning natural gas and you have a combined cycle unit, those things run 50 to 60% efficient, and the gas is relatively cheap. So that's why the utilities are putting the gas in, and the units respond much more quickly, so they can follow wind. That's what Excel Energy does.
I think so. Okay. Yeah.
The solar and the wind are first, and then the gas turbines and the other plants just follow and fill in the because wind, the fuel is free.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, that's the Colorado and Southern. We'll take a quick look at some of their equipment. Typical steam locomotives, very Burlington like in their they look very, I mean, these are just about like Burlington. I think these are Texas's on the joint line in Colorado. And here's a local. Here is this is at Climax. Later they tore up the narrow gauge, and they got trackage rights over the Rio Grande, and so they basically, it's an isolated line on the Burlington, but they standard gauged it, so they actually went from Leadville to Climax on standard gauge. But as you can see, here are the mountains over here, and you're not really looking up at the mountains.
Yeah.
Because Climax, I think, is 11,000 feet or something.
Wow.
And this is the molybdenum mine.
There it is again.
Here's a picture of it. Yeah, you can see serious snowplow there. Yeah, they even for the spring and the fall, you got to have and of course I'm sure they have a rotary. Anyway, I think this is a passenger train, or it's like a passenger train that would run up to Billings. And here's a freight on the Colorado and Southern. They had a lot of the CC units, the 6-axle, because of the and when the Burlington was buying GP40s, the Colorado and Southern bought, you can see there's a little C and S here. They bought SD40s. These are the original SD40s.
Yeah, right. Nice looking engine.
Yeah, it was. It's good looking engine. Here's a couple of them on a train. And they always had these cute little cabooses. So
Very, very cute.
Little bobber.
probably a little rough riding on the track, and then of course, as we know, the Burlington Northern finally were able to do what Jim Hill tried to do in 1896. Northern Pacific, Great Northern, Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, C and S, in Spokane and Portland and Seattle, into the Burlington Northern, and then the BNSF in 1996. 1996. So,
so leading up to this, Ross, now the GN and the NP were co-owners of the Burlington, correct?
Correct. That's absolutely correct. They own 98% of the stock.
With the merger that created Burlington Northern, was that more or less the merger of equals, or was there one particular dog in the fight that really was acquiring the rest?
Let's see. I think the way it went, because the GN and the NP owned the 98% of the Burlington, they probably just put an offer out to buy the rest of the stock. And then, let's see. And they already owned the Spokane and Portland, Seattle. So it was more of a
merger between the GN and NP?
Yeah. It'd be just a formality to create a new company and put all the companies in there. Yeah.